Hello YouTube, LD50 here, and I wanted to bring you my updated version 3 Amara Phaseslam build. Gearbox have recently increased the action skill damage so that it scales with Mayhem levels, and I wanted to see whether Phaseslam was now a viable damage based build. In our previous builds we really used Phaseslam to proc the action skill end anointments on our weapons, but this really should be doing some proper damage now. So we'll have a look at the skill tree and we'll talk about some weapons comms, and then we'll go and do a bit of combat, mobbing and bossing. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the Fist of Elements tree, and we are going to get down as far as Illuminated Fist. That's as far as we go in this tree. We are going to get 75% bonus melee damage to that, and we're also going to convert melee damage to action skill element. The damage on our main weapon, which will be the face puncher, will not be converted to action skill element because the face puncher doesn't work that way. But we can get that damage onto the face puncher by using infusion. So we'll put 5 out of 5 points into infusion, which will convert 40% of our regular gun damage into our action skill element, and that will allow us to get down to put a single point into Illuminated Fist. This also has the bonus of opening up Soulfire to be used as our action skill element. I wouldn't go ahead and put any points into Anima. It may give you slightly more damage, but you may find that it makes survivability a bit of an issue. So it's a bit of a safer build to put your points into infusion. But we need a maximum of 6 points in this tree, and that's how many we've used. We'll go over the blue tree now. Do harm. Do harm will affect our action skill. It will boost our action skill damage. In this instance, Phaseslam is boosted by action skill buffs, and this will give us 45% at 10 rush stacks action skill damage, and as you'll see when we get to the bottom of the tree, that will be increased to 20 maximum rush stacks, giving us a total of 90% action skill damage bonus. We'll put a single point into Violent Tapestry just because it will help us keep our rush stacks up. This is a build that's based upon rush stacks, and so we need to keep them up as far as possible. We won't be generally using a face Zerka comm, we'll be using a different comm, but I will talk about comms in a moment. So 5 out of 5 in Do Harm, a single point into Violent Tapestry, and then we must have 3 out of 3 into Transcend. Whilst melee damage and the face puncher doesn't do critical hit damage, we will be using this setup with a white elephant artifact, and the sticky bombs from that will do critical hit damage, so long as you actually hit the critical hit spot with the face puncher. Now, I like to have as much cooldown as possible. I currently don't have cooldown on my comm or artifact, so I'm going to put 5 points here. However, if you do have cooldown passives on your comm or your artifact, you may find that you can sacrifice these points and put them into reload via fast hands or alacrity, but I don't have that, so I'm going to put all 5 points here. We need to put a single point into Ascendant, because whichever augment we choose to use, it'll boost it, and it's only a single point. We will put 3 out of 3 into Wrath and 3 out of 3 into Laid Bear, and that will give us, with Wrath, 20% gun damage and a further 20% after our action skill has been used. So after using Phaseslam, we will have 40% gun damage for 8 seconds, and then Laid Bear, any enemies that are damaged by our action skill will take increased damage. That's a further 25% bonus there. Very nice. This is a rush stack based build, so we definitely want to put 3 points into Awakening to increase the effectiveness of our rush stacks. 1 single point into remnant, because we're looking for the overkill bonus here. Any overkill damage is added to the remnant projectile. The remnant projectile base damage at 1540 is quite negligible, but overkill damage is what's going to boost this up. Finally, we will put a point into mystical assault. This will allow us to use our action skill twice for every cooldown period, and we want to be using this action skill regularly to be dealing damage. We're going to go down the green tree now. Now this is the tree that has Phaseslam on it, so we'll enable Phaseslam. Now we don't want to put any points into personal space, because personal space does not affect the face puncher. Normally most Amara builds would want to have 3 points here for the multiplicative damage bonus, but in this case we're not going to use that. As it happens, one of the comms that I use will put points in here, but they're ineffective. I'm going to put my 5 points into clarity. The reason being is having some passive regen will protect you against dot damage. It will give you some extra survivability. 3 points into Samsara for the 25% gun damage and 25% health regen at full stacks. So when we damage an enemy with our action skill, it'll proc Samsara, which will mean that all our damage is greater and it will give us more survivability. I like to put 5 out of 5 into Arms Deal, which will increase splash damage. The splash damage will be coming from the sticky bombs on our artifact. We must put a single point into Find Your Center for the added melee damage. I like to put 3 points into Mindfulness, because that gives me more mobility to move around. And finally, we will put enough points into Helping Hands so that we can get down to Jab Cross. 1, 2, 3. Helping Hands again gives us some survivability after, or some damage reduction after using our action skill. And then finally, we want to put 5 points into Jab Cross, because when we deal melee damage, our action skill damage is increased by 75%. So we will use our face puncher to shoot the enemy once, applying melee damage, and then when we use our action skill, we will have an immediate 75% bonus applied to that. Now this is without a comm, and when I talk about comms in a moment, you'll see that the comm that I mainly use boosts this. It leaves us with 1 point, and I tend to put this point into Alacrity just for the reload. Reload is always useful, as we talked about when we went down the blue tree. If you've not putting all your points into Restless, then you may want to put more points into Alacrity here. Right, let's talk about the weapons. So our main weapon is going to be our face puncher, and we want the 300 over 90 anointment, because that anointment applies to our action skill. This is an action skill based build, so having that there will help us. I also like to use the Unforgiven, because I like to crit swap with this build. If you can shoot enemies crit spot with the face puncher whilst it's not doing melee damage, when we apply sticky bombs from the white elephant, which we'll talk about in a moment, they do crit damage, and if we swap to our Unforgiven, that will apply that crit damage bonus to those sticky bombs. Artifact. This we need to have a white elephant based artifact. This one here has an elemental projector prefix, but we also have a snowdrift, or you might find one with a cut purse or some other prefix that suits your playstyle. As long as you have the white elephant part, this will work. Our comm. Now the main comm that I tend to use for this build is a breaker comm, and this breaker comm is going to apply some bonuses to our skills here. Notably, it's going to apply a bonus to Jab Cross, and it's going to apply a bonus to Find Your Center. That immediately doubles your melee damage, you can see there. This particular comm is putting points in do harm. Sorry, in personal space. Personal space, as we talked about, doesn't really work with the face puncher. So if you find a comm that has, for instance, 4 points in jab cross, 1 point in find your center, you'll find that that's a massive damage boost. I don't have that, but this comm works for me. Other comms that you can use with this build, you can use a Phaseslam comm. This one here luckily has melee damage and action skill damage on it, but what it does do is it gives us an extra 5 rush stacks, and by using our action skill it immediately refunds all of the rush stacks. It's not a rush stack build, but it will work with a Phaseslam comm. If you don't have a good breaker, a Phaseslam will help. It also gives you cooldown, which isn't a bad thing. You can also use this with a spiritual driver comm. For instance, this one has splash damage and this one has shotgun damage. The shotgun damage is quite good for the face puncher, and I believe that the Hyperion weapon critical damage will apply to the sticky bombs from the white elephant. But obviously the main thing about the driver comm is that it boosts elemental damage for having a damage over time applied to you. By using our action skill, we will apply a damage over time. In this case, we'll have applied a shock damage over time, and all shock damage will be boosted by the elemental projector part of the white elephant. So you can see why I have the elemental projector here. That's really only for the spiritual driver. We'll put this back to the breaker comm. Grenades, well, I would suggest you probably want to use an action skill end elemental damage bonus on your grenade, like incendiary or radiation or such. And for your shield, I have a lot of success using the frozen heart, because frozen enemies take 3 times melee damage, and by triggering or depleting the shield, a large cryo nova is dealt and freezes enemies. You might also like to use an action skill element shield, say for instance something like this, for bosses where you're not necessarily going to be freezing them. This will give you elemental damage bonus instead. If you're using a driver comm, you could potentially use a low level ward, because using the low level ward and using a driver comm will break the shield for you. I'll just demonstrate that for you. So I'll let the shield fill up, and if I use my action skill, you will see it breaks the shield completely. And the ward gives bonus melee damage while the shield is depleted. This also happens to have an action skill end elemental bonus on it, but the ward will give you 180% melee damage on this version. Or if I was to use this version over here, I'm going to get 300% melee damage bonus whilst the shield is depleted. But as I said, I have been having a lot of success with, particularly with mobbing, using the frozen heart. With regard to other weapons, obviously this is a melee based build, but if you want to do other damage, then any anointment that procs on action skill end, so for instance this one weapon damage, or any phase cast specific anointment, for instance this one gives 300% damage after Phaseslam, will be good for these weapons. With regard to the Guardian rank, this build will work with the Groundbreaker skill. It's a new skill or new Guardian rank perk that's been introduced. However, it will work without, and we will turn it off. Not that, we will turn off the individual perk, and we will do some demonstrations with it at Athena's, and then we will turn it on so you can see that it will work without. Obviously you get more damage with it on, but if you don't have the 125 points to invest in this, then the build will work without that perk. And just quickly, I like to use Speed Demon and Holy Crit on my modifiers. Speed Demon is good, got to go fast, and Holy Crit, whilst it reduces non-critical hit damage, so that's just standard melee damage, it will increase critical hits from the White Elephant artifact. I tend to use Healy Avenger and Drone Raver as my medium and hard modifiers because they're the least objectionable. So that is the build. I'll demonstrate the or show the skill trees quickly again. Augments. The augments that you would want to use with this build. Well, really you've only got one choice. You've got two choices actually. You've got Soul Sap over here. A portion of all damage dealt by Amara's action skills returned to her or nearby ally as health, which is boosted by Ascendant. Gives another 20% lifesteal. So if you find that you need some extra life, this is the one to use. You could use Stillness of Mind. If you find that enemies are getting away from you, you can face slam into the middle of them, and these will keep any that are damaged by the face slam locked in place. However, I've been having a lot of success using Revelation. The Nova damage does seem negligible, and it does reduce action skill damage a little bit, but the Nova damage seems to scale with melee, scale with Mayhem, and I believe is also affected by the 300/90 anointment. So I've been using that, and I've been finding that it's very successful. And then obviously whichever action skill element you choose to use, you might use Blight Tiger for corrosive enemies, or you might use Soulfire for enemies that are weak to fire, or you could de-equip it and just have it as your standard shock element. The choice is yours. So that's the build. We'll take a trip over to Athena's and we'll do some combat. Then we'll jump into a couple of bosses and see how we're performing there. And then we'll recap at the end. So we'll see you over at Athena's. Welcome back. We're going to take a quick run through Athena's. We'll use a different comm, I think, for each area, just so that you can see the difference that the comms make to the playstyle and the damage. So first off, I think we'll use the breaker comm for our first area. Then I think perhaps we'll use the phase zerker, and then maybe we'll finally use the driver for the last area. Before we head on up towards the boss. Right, so first area with the breaker. Obviously we're expecting to jab cross, so to get the most out of our action skill damage we want to be meleeing first, and as the face puncher does melee damage, we can just shoot our enemies once, use the face slam action skill, and that will be boosted. For our Unforgiven there, as we managed to get a couple of sticky bombs to land, and we'll head on up to these enemies here, give them a tap, and yes, we did a significant amount of damage. I'm down for a brawl. Check that Nog there, looks like we got rid of 2 of his health bars with that face slam. Gearbox have obviously improved the way that the action skill damage scales with Mayhem now. and that's making these builds a little bit more viable. Right, there we go. That appears to be all of the enemies in this area. So that was the breaker comm. We'll stick the Phaseslam comm on, I think, for the next area. The one I have here has bonus to melee damage and action skill damage. So where we're going to lose the extra point that we have from the breaker comm here, we're going to gain action skill damage, and we'll gain melee damage because they are passives on this Phaseslam. Now obviously your own Phaseslam may not have these passive bonuses and your results may vary. What the Phaseslam will do is give us an extra 5 rush stacks, which will increase the action skill damage. We have lost a couple of points in jab cross. We're now down to a 5 out of 5 rather than 7 out of 5, so we're only getting 75% action skill damage boost here, but we are getting a boost through the rush stacks and also through the passives on the comm. Right, looks like it's a badass enemy over there, which is good. Let's sticky bombs on his crit spot there. We'll just take a little detour up here, recompose ourselves, and need to wait for our action skill to come back there before we can use our Phaseslam action skill again. But even without our action skill being active, we are getting plenty of damage out of this build. Enemy's just up there. We managed to get a sticky bomb on his head, and there you go. Right, so this next area I think we'll change over to the spiritual driver. Obviously with the spiritual driver we really want to be using an elemental projector version of the white elephant, which we do have on here. I'm going to use this spiritual driver here because it happens to have the shotgun damage and the Hyperion weapon critical damage. Whilst the face puncher, being a Hyperion weapon, doesn't do well, not because it's Hyperion, but because it's the face puncher, it doesn't do critical hit damage. The white elephant artifact sticky bombs will do critical hit damage and will be boosted by that 51% Hyperion weapon damage. Everything else is the same for this bit, so it's just a driver that we've changed. We'll proceed on to this area now. Got a nog down there and a heavy. Let's get some melee damage on them. And we're doing plenty of damage there, even though my inexpertise meant I went into fight for my life. As you can see, if you're a more skilled player than I am, you're going to find better results from this build. But even an old duffer like me is finding that this is a lot of fun to play, and I'm not really having any massive issues with it. I think I might have just seen 9 million on the screen there. Yeah, they're just exploding. So whilst this build might not be the one-hit delete that the Groundbreaker build is, this is nonetheless a very powerful build. I'm going to turn on Groundbreaker now for the next part to see if we can increase the damage even more. As you may be aware, melee attacks or slam will trigger an aftershock, dealing 25% of all non-melee damage. Well, all of the sticky bomb damage, dots, anything like that is classed as non-melee damage. And also, if you use the spiritual driver comm, the self-damage provided by that is also considered to be non-melee. But we will run through the final area with the breaker comm one, I think. I like the breaker comm. And with Groundbreaker on, we should find that we are going to be doing a lot more damage. But I did want to just show that this build works without Groundbreaker on. It is the overpowered skill that has been introduced recently, and Gearbox may potentially, in their wisdom, decide to adjust it in the future if they feel that it is, in quotes, overperforming. But whilst it's there, we'll enjoy it. And as you can see, with Groundbreaker enabled, we increase the damage.
I
think I saw another 9 million just there.
Calling for suppressive fire!
I think that was possibly overkill bonus Guardian rank that may have finished off that last enemy. I'll go through the Guardian rank interactions at the end of this little run through here. So we're going to pop some melee onto them, jump up, use our action skill, and they pretty much just disappeared.
Oh, I could get used to this.
An easy 3 million there, I saw.
Ready for a fight.
Right, we'll go and see the final boss and see how we do against Captain Traun. Now we need to get close-ish so we can... And that's a good chunk of his health gone in one go. If we can get round the back and get some stickies on his crit spot.
Feel the power. Ooh, needed the break.
Which we didn't manage at that point. And there he is gone. So very viable build even for this type of bossing. I would imagine that this will be viable for all of the content that BHL 3 has. It may struggle a little bit more perhaps in the Guardian takedown, but that might be down to skill rather than the build. Somebody with a bit more skill than me will probably be able to breeze through that with this build. I think we'll pop off and maybe do... Well, we'll do Grave Ward, I think. We'll do Grave Ward and maybe another boss as well, just to show that it's viable for a single targets as well. So we'll see you over at Grave Ward. We're here over at Grave Ward. We're going to set our action skill element to fire, and we have equipped a grenade that has an action skill element anointment on it for 50% bonus incendiary damage, which will help because Grave Ward is weak to fire. We will be using the crit swap method here. It can be done without the crit swap method. Takes a little bit longer. We'll see how we go anyway. We're getting a decent amount of damage out of that. He's 2/3 down. Let's see if we can do a bit of action skill damage to him. Nice and close. Took a little chunk off. He definitely took a little chunk off. But obviously once we're able to get some hits on his crit spot and swap to our Unforgiven for the crit swap bonus, he went down nice and easily. We'll move on to, I think we're going to do Gigamind as well, just to give another view or another aspect to this build. So we'll see you over at Gigamind's enclosure. So welcome back, we're here over at Gigamind's enclosure. I have set my action skill element to shock. It's a visual bug that it's showing red, but it is actually a shock element. And I have still have on the incendiary grenade. The reason I chose a shock is he has a big shield, and it gets through that nice and quickly. So we'll move on and see what we can do to Gigamind with this build. So again, we want to
For a brawl.
As you can see, made short work with Gigamind. So yeah, there you go. That's the melee Amara Phaseslam build that I've put together. I would like to add that this is based on work that other people have done. Some of it's based upon the work that Commander Keen has done, and Epic Damo on the boards as well. Just wanted to present my version of this build. So we'll have a quick recap of the skills, and we'll have a quick recap of the Guardian rank, and then we'll call it a day. So recapping our skills, there's our green tree. We are getting a lot of our melee damage with this particular comm from Find Your Center, and we're getting a lot of action skill damage from Jab Cross. That's our blue tree, concentrating on improving our action skill damage via rush stacks. And then our red tree, which is getting down as far as to apply the Illuminated Fist, which is the applying our action skill element to our melee. That also opens up the Soulfire action skill element as well. This build will allow you to use corrosive shock or fire as your action skill element, which will give you the required variation you need for playing through any content in the game. Finally, we will have a quick look at the Guardian rank, and then perhaps we'll also have a quick look at the Mayhem modifiers as well. I did show you part of Athena's without using Groundbreaker, just to show you that it was a viable build at Mayhem 10. Obviously, once we enabled Groundbreaker, the damage went up exponentially. But you do need 125 points in the Enforcer tree to get that. So if you don't have all those points, this build will still work. It'll still work adequately. The other skills that are useful with this build are Overkill. During Athena's, you would notice that one of the heavies just disappeared in a cloud of smoke. That was because this overkill damage was being applied to that shot. So the excess damage from the previous kill, anything that was more than was needed to kill the enemy, is referred to as overkill. And this Guardian rank here, which is only 25 tokens into the tree, applies that damage to your next shot. Finally, we'll have a quick look at the Mayhem modifiers. These are modifiers I particularly like to use. I like Speed Demon because I like to get around, got to go fast. Healy Avenger and Drone Ranger, to me, are the least objectionable medium and hard modifiers. I struggle a little bit with the ground pool element style modifiers, like Ground is Lava or Pool Party, so I prefer these. And then I like to have Holy Crit. Now, non-crit damage, which is all melee damage, is reduced by 50%, but critical hit damage is increased by 25%. And the sticky bombs that the White Elephant delivers do get that 25% bonus. So against large targets like Grave Ward, with large crit spots, this modifier actually works in your favour. It also encourages you to try to aim for critical hits if you can, because it will give more damage. So that is my take on the melee Amara Phaseslam build. I've had a lot of fun with it. I do hope that you gave it a go and you get as much fun out of it as I have. Right, well, bye for now, and I'll see you in the next video. Please hit the like button if you have enjoyed this content, and consider subscribing. It would help me out a lot. Thank you very much.